Tonight, in the heart of London's most elite gathering, a duke will destroy his reputation for a woman the world calls a killer. 5 years ago, duty tore them apart. Now she stands accused of murder, wrapped in black silk and whispers of poison. He is untouchable, powerful, wealthy, desired by every noble family in England. But when their eyes meet across a crowded ballroom, the past explodes into the present with devastating force. This is their story. One of forbidden love, brutal scandal, and a truth that will shatter high society. Stay until the end, like this video. Comment which city you're watching from. The gas lamps of Pemberton Gallery cast golden light across marble floors slick with winter rain tracked in by London's finest. Outside, carriages lined Piccadilly 3 deep, their drivers hunched against the February cold, while inside, the aristocracy celebrated the opening of what society columns promised would be the exhibition of the decade. Paintings from Vienna, sculptures from Rome, and gossip, always gossip, fresh as the champagne flowing from crystal fountains. Duke Sebastian Hawthorne stood near the rear wall, a glass of untouched wine in his hand, watching the crowd with the detached interest of a man who had seen this performance too many times to be impressed. At 32, he cut a striking figure. Tall and lean, dark hair swept back from a face that artists begged to paint and mothers schemed to capture for their daughters. The Hawthorne fortune was legendary. The Hawthorne estate sprawled across 3 counties, and the Hawthorne Duke, for 5 years running, had refused every marriage proposal, every subtle introduction, every not-so-subtle hint that it was time to secure the bloodline. Still playing the hermit, Sebastian? Lord Charles Whitmore appeared at his elbow, ruddy-cheeked from champagne and self-satisfaction. The Pemberton girl has been staring at you for the past 20 minutes. Quite pretty. Excellent dowry. You could do worse. I could also do nothing, Sebastian said mildly, which remains my preference. Charles laughed, the boom of it turning heads. You can't avoid it forever, old friend. The gossips are starting to wonder if you prefer the company of the gossips, Sebastian interrupted, his voice still pleasant but edged with steel. Can wonder whatever entertains them. I don't plan my life around their speculation. Fair enough. Charles raised his glass in mock surrender. Though I'd wager £100 you'll be engaged before the season ends. No man stands alone forever. Sebastian didn't answer. His attention had shifted to the gallery entrance, where a sudden hush had fallen over the crowd like snow smothering sound. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the string quartet in the corner seemed to falter, violin bows trembling against strings. A woman stood framed in the doorway. She wore black, full mourning, stark against the pastels and jewel tones surrounding her. The dress was simple, almost severe, with none of the elaborate trim and bustle that fashion demanded. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that would have seemed plain on anyone else, but somehow emphasized the elegant line of her neck, the sharp intelligence in her eyes. She was neither young nor old, perhaps 28 or 29, and she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who had learned to expect blows from every direction. My God, Charles breathed. Is that Eleanor Ashford? Sebastian said. The name came out rough, scraping his throat raw. The gallery remained frozen. Women leaned toward each other, lips moving behind fans. Men straightened, expressions shifting from curiosity to calculation to something darker. Sebastian could feel the weight of it, the collective judgment of 200 aristocrats falling on one woman like an avalanche. Eleanor's gaze swept the room, and for just a moment, less than a heartbeat, her eyes found his. The world tilted. 5 years. It had been 5 years since he'd last seen her, standing in the rain outside her father's estate, tears mixing with water on her face as she told him it was over. That duty required her to marry Lord Thomas Ashford, a man twice her age with estates in decline and debts that needed the infusion of her family's money. That love, however real, was a luxury neither of them could afford. He had let her go, stood there like a fool and let her walk away because gentlemen didn't fight over promised brides, because her family's honor demanded the match, because he'd believed, like an idiot, that time would dull the edge of wanting her. Time had done nothing. The Black Widow herself, Charles muttered. I didn't think she'd dare show her face in society again. Not after... After what? Sebastian's voice came out harder than he'd intended. Charles shot him a sidelong look. After her husband died under mysterious circumstances. You remember the scandal. Thomas Ashford, dead at 45 with no obvious illness. Found in his study. No marks on him, just dead. And Eleanor inheriting everything. The rumors were vicious. Rumors aren't facts. No, but they're enough to destroy a reputation. Half of London believes she poisoned him. The other half just thinks she's dangerously ambitious. Charles paused. Why do you care? You didn't even know her, did you? Sebastian took a long drink of wine to avoid answering. The lie of omission sat bitter on his tongue. He'd known her. Known the sound of her laugh, the feel of her hand in his. The way she'd argued philosophy and science with a passion that made every other conversation feel like empty noise. Known her well enough that when duty had torn them apart, it had left scars neither time nor distance could fully heal. Eleanor moved into the room with deliberate steps, her chin high despite the whispers following her like hounds on a scent. She stopped in front of a painting, some Venetian landscape, all golden light and impossible perspective, and stood there alone, an island of black in a sea of color. No one approached her. No one dared. Excuse me, Sebastian said, setting down his glass. Charles grabbed his arm. Sebastian, don't. Don't what? Whatever you're thinking. That woman is social poison. One conversation with her and you'll be fighting off scandal for months. Sebastian carefully removed Charles's hand from his sleeve. Then I suppose I'd better make it a good conversation. He crossed the gallery floor with long strides, aware of every eye tracking his movement, every whisper rising in his wake. The crowd parted for him. They always did. But tonight it felt less like respect and more like people clearing a stage for disaster. Eleanor didn't turn when he stopped beside her. She continued studying the painting, her profile composed, giving nothing away. Lady Ashford, he said quietly. Your Grace. Her voice was exactly as he remembered, low and clear, with a slight rasp that suggested either tears or defiance, possibly both. I wondered if you'd acknowledge me. Most people are choosing to pretend I'm invisible. I've never been good at pretending. No, you were always brutally honest. She finally looked at him, and the impact of those green eyes meeting his nearly broke his composure. It was one of the things I admired about you. The near slip hung between them like smoke. How have you been, Eleanor? A bitter smile touched her lips. Truthfully, or would you prefer the polite fiction? Truth. Always truth between us. She turned back to the painting, but her hands clasped together so tightly the knuckles went white. I've been surviving. Living in the country, away from society, away from the whispers. This is my first public appearance in 3 years. My solicitor advised against it, but I was tired of hiding. You have nothing to hide from, don't I? She gestured subtly at the room around them. Look at them. They think I'm a murderer, that I killed Thomas for his money and his estates. Never mind that his fortune was gone long before he died. Never mind that I nursed him through illness for years. To them, I'm the ambitious widow who traded her soul for a title. Sebastian felt anger kindle in his chest. Not at her, never at her, but at the small-minded cruelty of people who built themselves up by tearing others down. What actually happened? The truth? Thomas had a weak heart. His physician knew it, I knew it. But Thomas refused to slow down, refused to accept limitations. He drove himself into the ground with worry over debts he couldn't pay, and a legacy crumbling around him. One night his heart simply gave out. Her voice remained steady, but Sebastian could hear the exhaustion underneath. But truth doesn't matter to people who prefer a good story. It matters to me. She met his eyes again, searching for something. Why? We haven't spoken in 5 years, Sebastian. You moved on, built your life. You don't owe me anything. I never moved on. The words came out before he could stop them, raw and unfiltered. Eleanor's breath caught. Don't, she whispered. Don't say things like that. Why not? It's true. You asked for honesty. Because it makes everything harder. Because I came here tonight to prove I could face society again, not to... She stopped, shaking her head. I need to go. She turned to leave, but Sebastian caught her hand. barely a touch, just his fingers against hers, but it froze her in place. Around them, the whispers rose to a roar. "Stay," he said quietly. "For one more minute, please." Eleanor's eyes closed briefly, some internal battle playing across her features. When she opened them again, there was pain there, and something that might have been hope if hope hadn't been beaten down too many times. "1 minute," she agreed. "Then I leave, and you let me go. For your own good. Let me decide what's good for me. You don't understand what associating with me will cost you. The scandal is already happening." Sebastian nodded toward the crowd, where every face was turned toward them now, no longer pretending to look at art. "We're the center of attention. Might as well give them something to talk about." Before she could protest, he offered his arm. "Walk with me, Lady Ashford. Let's examine the rest of the exhibition." She stared at his arm like it was a snake ready to strike. "Sebastian, one circuit of the gallery. Then, if you want to leave, I won't stop you." He could see her struggling, torn between the desire to run and something else, something that looked like the drowning woman seeing a rope. Finally, slowly, she placed her hand on his arm. The touch burned through layers of wool and linen, like a brand. They walked together through the gallery, past paintings and sculptures that Sebastian registered only as blurs of color and form. All his attention focused on the woman beside him, the slight tremble in her fingers where they rested on his sleeve, the careful way she held her head high despite the stares and whispers following them like a storm front. "This is madness," Eleanor murmured as they paused before a marble statue of Diana the Huntress. "By tomorrow, every gossip column in London will have you engaged to the Black Widow." "Let them write what they want." "You say that now, but when your friends start avoiding you, when invitations stop coming, when mothers pull their daughters away because you've been tainted by association with me, Eleanor." He stopped, turning to face her fully. Around them, the crowd buzzed like disturbed bees, but he ignored them. "I don't care about any of that." "You should. Reputation is everything in our world." "Then perhaps our world values the wrong things." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Spoken like a man who's never had his reputation destroyed. "You're a duke, Sebastian. Wealthy, powerful, untouchable. I'm a widow under a cloud of suspicion. We're not the same." "No," he agreed. "We're not. But that doesn't change how I feel." "And how is that?" The question hung between them, dangerous and necessary. Sebastian knew that answering honestly would cross a line, would turn this from a chance encounter into something deliberate and irreversible. But he'd spent 5 years being careful, being appropriate, being the duke that society expected. And for what? Empty rooms and emptier conversations with people who bored him to tears? "Like I've been holding my breath for 5 years," he said quietly, "and I can finally breathe again." Eleanor's eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. For a moment she looked exactly as she had that last night in the rain, young and vulnerable and breaking apart. "Sebastian, we can't." "Why not?" "Because I'll destroy you. Don't you understand? Everything I touch turns to scandal and ruin. My husband is dead under suspicious circumstances. My reputation is in tatters. If you pursue this, if you pursue me, you'll be dragged down with me. Then I'll be dragged down. That's not romantic, it's idiotic." "Perhaps." He smiled, a real smile that felt foreign after years of polite masks. "But I've been perfectly respectable and perfectly miserable. I'm willing to try idiotic for a change." Before Eleanor could respond, a new voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Lady Ashford, what a surprise to see you here." They turned to find Lady Cordelia Pemberton bearing down on them, her daughter Margaret in tow. Cordelia was a formidable woman in her 50s, dressed in purple silk that strained against her considerable frame, her face arranged in an expression of shocked concern that fooled no one. She was one of society's most vicious gossips, and she clearly scented blood. "Lady Pemberton," Eleanor said with a polite nod that somehow conveyed absolute indifference. "What a lovely exhibition you've hosted." "Yes, well, we do try to maintain standards." Cordelia's eyes flicked between Eleanor and Sebastian, calculation gleaming in their depths. "Though I must confess I'm surprised to see you in attendance. After everything, I would have thought you'd prefer the quiet of the countryside. I've had enough quiet, thank you. How brave of you. The words dripped with false sympathy. Though I wonder if it's entirely appropriate for you to be out of mourning so soon. Your husband has been gone less than 2 years, hasn't he? Eleanor's spine straightened, tension radiating through her frame where Sebastian's hand still rested on her arm. 23 months, actually. An acceptable period according to every etiquette guide published. For a normal death, perhaps, but in cases where the circumstances were questionable. Cordelia let the sentence trail off, her meaning clear. "Mother," Margaret whispered urgently, her young face flushed with embarrassment. "Please." "I'm simply expressing concern, darling. It's what one does for old friends." Cordelia turned her attention to Sebastian, her smile sharpening. "Your Grace, I hope you'll forgive my boldness, but as someone who cares deeply for your family's reputation, I feel compelled to offer a word of warning. There are some associations that can be, damaging." Sebastian felt his jaw tighten. "I appreciate your concern, Lady Pemberton. However, I'm quite capable of choosing my own associations." Of course, but surely you're aware of the whispers. The questions about Lord Ashford's death? A man in your position must be careful about what? Being seen with a woman whose only crime was surviving her husband's death? Sebastian's voice remained pleasant, but ice ran underneath. Or are you suggesting that whispers and gossip should dictate who deserves respect and who doesn't? Cordelia's smile faltered. Around them, the crowd had gone silent, everyone straining to hear the confrontation. "I'm suggesting nothing of the sort. Merely that a young duke with no wife and an uncertain succession should perhaps be more selective about the company he keeps, especially when that company includes women of dubious character." Eleanor pulled her hand from Sebastian's arm. "If you'll excuse me, Your Grace, I believe I should go." "No." Sebastian caught her hand again, this time lacing his fingers through hers in a gesture that was unmistakably possessive. The gasp that rippled through the crowd was audible. "Actually, Lady Pemberton, I think you should apologize to Lady Ashford for impugning her character without evidence." Cordelia's face flushed purple. "I beg your pardon? You've made serious accusations against a woman who has never been charged with any crime. Accusations based on nothing but gossip and spite. So apologize or remove yourself from my presence." "How dare you?" "I dare quite a lot, actually. It's one of the benefits of being a duke." Sebastian's voice remained calm, but his eyes had gone hard. "Your choice, Lady Pemberton." For a long moment, Cordelia stared at him in disbelief, clearly unused to being challenged. Margaret tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering frantically. Finally, Cordelia drew herself up with wounded dignity. "I see. Well, I suppose we know now where your loyalties lie, Your Grace. Good evening." She swept away with Margaret trailing behind, casting apologetic glances over her shoulder. The crowd erupted into furious whispers. Sebastian turned to Eleanor, who was staring at him with a mixture of shock and horror. "What have you done?" she whispered. "Defended you. You just made an enemy of one of society's most influential women. Do you know what she'll say about you?" "I don't care." "Sebastian." "Eleanor, listen to me." He took both her hands now, ignoring the scandal it would cause. "I've spent 5 years being careful, being appropriate, being the perfect duke who never makes waves or challenges the status quo. And I've been miserable every single day. Seeing you again, it reminded me what it feels like to actually care about something, about someone. I'm not going to let small-minded people like Cordelia Pemberton dictate my life anymore." Tears gathered in Eleanor's eyes. "You'll regret this. When the scandal really hits, when you see what it costs, then I'll pay the cost. But I won't abandon you again, not to gossip, not to propriety, not to anything." A tear slipped down her cheek. "You're insane." "Probably. Do you want to leave? We can go somewhere quieter, talk properly." Eleanor looked around the gallery at the sea of staring faces, the whispers, the judgment. Then she looked back at Sebastian, and something in her expression shifted, fear giving way to defiance. "Yes," she said. "Let's get out of here." They walked toward the exit together, Sebastian's hand firmly on the small of her back. The crowd parted for them, but the whispers followed like hounds. Did you see? The Duke and the widow? Scandal. Absolute scandal. He held her hand right there in front of everyone. She must have seduced him, no better than a common fortune hunter. Sebastian helped Eleanor into his carriage, then climbed in after her and rapped on the ceiling. The driver pulled away from the curb, leaving the gallery and its gossips behind. Inside the carriage, Eleanor sat across from him, her hands twisted together in her lap. The gas street lamps flickered past, casting moving shadows across her face. "This was a mistake," she said finally. "I should never have come tonight, should never have spoken to you. Do you wish you hadn't?" She was quiet for a long moment. "No, and that's what makes it worse. Because seeing you again, talking to you, it made me remember what it felt like to be happy. To be seen as something other than a scandal or a burden. But happiness isn't enough, Sebastian. Not in our world. Then perhaps we need a different world. You can't just wish away reality." "No, but I can fight it." He leaned forward, his eyes intense in the dim light. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something. When you married Thomas, I thought I would get over you. That time would fade what I felt. It didn't. Every woman I met was measured against you and found wanting. Every conversation was empty because it wasn't with you. I've been going through the motions of life for 5 years, and tonight was the first time I felt alive again." "That's not fair," she whispered. "No, it's not. But it's true." He reached across the space between them and took her hand. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight. I'm not asking for anything except a chance. Let me see you again. Let me prove that I'm serious about this. People will talk. They're already talking. It will get worse. I know. You could lose friends, opportunities, your standing in society, all of which I'd trade in a heartbeat for a chance with you." Eleanor closed her eyes, a single tear tracking down her cheek. "You're going to break my heart again." "I'm going to try very hard not to." The carriage rolled through London's darkened streets, carrying them away from the scandal they'd created and towards something uncertain and dangerous and real. Tomorrow, the gossip columns would explode. Tomorrow, society would begin its judgment. Tomorrow, the real fight would start. But tonight, in the close darkness of a carriage, Sebastian held Eleanor's hand and felt, for the first time in 5 years, like he'd found his way home. The carriage stopped outside Eleanor's townhouse in Bloomsbury, a modest building by aristocratic standards, tucked away on a quiet street far from the fashionable squares where most of her former peers lived. Sebastian stepped down first and offered his hand, aware that even this simple gesture would fuel tomorrow's gossip. Eleanor hesitated before taking it. "You shouldn't come inside." "I'm not planning to, but I'll see you to your door." "Sebastian, to your door, Eleanor. Nothing scandalous about that." She allowed him to escort her up the steps, though her posture remained rigid with tension. At the door, she turned to face him, the gaslight from the street casting shadows across her face. "Thank you for tonight," she said quietly, "for defending me, even if it was reckless. When can I see you again?" "You can't. Tonight was already too much. By morning, every drawing room in London will be dissecting what happened at the gallery." "Then let them dissect. I'll call on you tomorrow afternoon." "No." Her voice sharpened. "Listen to me. What happened tonight? It was a moment of weakness on both our parts. But we can't let it continue. You need to distance yourself from me before the damage becomes permanent." Sebastian stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What if I don't want to distance myself?" "Then you're a fool." But her eyes betrayed her, lingering on his face with something like hunger. "Go home, Sebastian. Forget this happened. By next week, society will have moved on to some other scandal." "I won't have moved on. You will. You must." She fumbled with her key, her hands shaking slightly. "Good night, Your Grace." The door closed between them with a finality that felt like a wound. Sebastian stood there for a long moment, staring at the dark wood, before returning to his carriage. "Home, Your Grace?" the driver asked. "Yes, home." But as the carriage rolled through London's empty streets, Sebastian knew that sleep would be impossible. His mind kept replaying the evening, Eleanor's face when she'd seen him, the feel of her hand in his, The desperation in her voice when she'd begged him to walk away. He'd meant what he said. He wouldn't walk away. Not this time. Morning brought the storm he'd anticipated, delivered with his breakfast on a silver tray. The London Chronicle led with a headline that made his butler wince. Duke defends widow. Society scandal erupts at Pemberton Gallery. Sebastian skimmed the article while his coffee grew cold. The reporter had captured every detail with gleeful precision. His defense of Eleanor, the public confrontation with Lady Pemberton, the way he'd held Eleanor's hand with unmistakable intimacy before whisking her away in his carriage. The piece concluded with thinly veiled speculation about whether the Duke of Hawthorne had been ensnared by a woman some say played a role in her own husband's mysterious demise. He tossed the paper aside in disgust. "Your Grace," his butler ventured carefully, "Lord Whitmore has called 3 times this morning already, and Lady Pemberton's secretary sent a rather strongly worded note requesting an audience. Tell Charles I'll see him. Tell Lady Pemberton to go to hell, politely." The butler's expression didn't change. "Of course, sir, and there are 17 other messages awaiting your attention. Shall I—" "Later. Send Charles up when he arrives." His friend appeared within the hour, bursting into Sebastian's study with the morning papers clutched in his fist and outrage written across his face. "Have you lost your mind?" Charles threw the papers onto Sebastian's desk. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Defended a woman from baseless accusations. Yes, I'm aware. That woman is social poison. By this time next week, you'll be a pariah." Sebastian poured himself another cup of coffee, deliberately calm. "I survived university. I think I can survive some gossip." "This isn't gossip, Sebastian. This is character assassination. Half of London thinks Eleanor Ashford murdered her husband. The other half thinks she's a fortune hunter who seduced him into an early grave. Either way, she's untouchable." "Funny. I touched her just fine last night." Charles's face went red. "This isn't a joke. Your reputation is my own concern." Sebastian set down his cup with enough force to make it rattle. "Charles, I appreciate your friendship, but I won't be lectured about whom I choose to associate with." "Associate with?" The papers are suggesting considerably more than association. Charles sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. "Tell me the truth. Is there history between you and Eleanor Ashford?" Sebastian considered lying. It would be easier, safer. But Charles deserved better than that. "We were involved 5 years ago before she married Thomas Ashford. Her family needed money. My father was still alive and controlled my inheritance. We couldn't marry, so she did her duty and married Thomas instead." "Good God." Charles stared at him. "And you've been carrying a torch for her all this time?" "Something like that." "Sebastian, listen to me. I understand what it's like to want something you can't have, but Eleanor Ashford comes with baggage that could sink you. The scandal around her husband's death was manufactured by vultures looking for entertainment. Thomas Ashford had a weak heart. His physician confirmed it. But nobody wants to hear the boring truth when murder makes a better story." "Maybe so. But perception is reality in our world. And right now, people perceive her as dangerous." "Then I'll change their perception." Charles laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think you can rehabilitate her reputation through sheer force of will?" "Sebastian, this isn't like your reform projects or your progressive ideas about estate management. This is society. It doesn't bend to logic or fairness." "Then I'll break it." The words hung in the air between them. Charles's expression shifted from exasperation to something like concern. "You're serious about this?" "Completely. Even if it costs you everything? Everything I'd lose isn't worth keeping if it means abandoning her again." Charles stood, straightening his jacket. "Then I hope you know what you're doing, because the wolves are circling, my friend, and they smell blood." After Charles left, Sebastian sat alone in his study, watching rain streak down the windows. He should have felt worried, perhaps, concerned about the scandal brewing around him. Instead, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. He pulled out writing paper and began composing a letter. Guac. Eleanor received his note that afternoon, delivered by a footman in Hawthorne livery. Her housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, a stern woman who'd stayed with Eleanor through the worst of the scandal, brought it to her study with disapproval radiating from every pore. "From the Duke, my lady." Eleanor's hands trembled as she broke the seal. The note was brief. "I meant what I said. I'll call on you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. If you won't receive me, I'll stand on your doorstep until you do. Stubbornness is a family trait." S. She should have burned it, should have written back refusing to see him. Instead, she found herself pressing the paper against her chest, eyes closed, feeling the first real hope she'd allowed herself in 3 years. "Bad news, my lady?" Mrs. Davies asked. "I'm not sure yet," the housekeeper sniffed. "I've seen the morning papers. Dreadful what they're saying, though I suppose we should have expected it." "Yes, we should have." Eleanor set the letter aside. "Mrs. Davies, what would you do if you had a chance at happiness, but taking it might hurt someone you cared about?" The older woman's expression softened slightly. "I'd ask myself which I'd regret more, the hurt I caused by trying or the life I lost by not trying at all." Eleanor looked at her in surprise. "That's rather profound." "I've had 60 years to think about it, my lady. Plenty of time for profundity." Mrs. Davies turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, that young Duke seems like the sort who knows his own mind. If he's choosing to stand with you despite the scandal, maybe you should let him." After she left, Eleanor picked up the morning papers Mrs. Davies had brought with the breakfast tray. She'd avoided them until now, knowing what she'd find. The Chronicle was worst, but the others weren't far behind. The Post called her Lady Death. The Gazette suggested darkly that the Duke of Hawthorne might want to watch his tea. The Times, at least, maintained some journalistic dignity, but even they couldn't resist noting the troubling questions surrounding her late husband's demise. She was still reading when a knock came at her door. Not Mrs. Davies this time. The sound was too hesitant. "Come in." Her younger sister, Catherine, slipped inside, closing the door quickly behind her. At 23, Catherine still had the bright-eyed optimism that Eleanor remembered from her own youth, before marriage and scandal had ground it away. "I came as soon as I could slip away," Catherine said, crossing to embrace her. "Mother would have my head if she knew I was here." "Then you shouldn't have come." "Don't be ridiculous. You're my sister." Catherine pulled back, studying Eleanor's face. "Are you all right? The papers this morning are saying exactly what I expected them to say." "But it's not fair. That Duke defended you. He stood up to Lady Pemberton in front of everyone. Shouldn't that count for something?" Eleanor moved to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked street. "It counts for ruining his reputation along with mine. By next week, he'll be a laughingstock." "Or a romantic hero." Catherine came to stand beside her. "Eleanor, I saw the way he looked at you. I was there last night in the corner with Mother. She nearly fainted when you walked in, but I couldn't look away. And when the Duke approached you, the way his whole face changed when he saw you, that's not nothing. It's not enough either. Love doesn't pay debts or silence gossip or rebuild reputations. Maybe not, but it's better than the alternative." Catherine took her hand. "You've been alone for so long, living in this house like a prisoner, avoiding society, punishing yourself for crimes you didn't commit. Don't you deserve a chance at happiness?" "Not if it destroys someone else's life." "What about your life? Doesn't that matter?" The question hung unanswered, because the truth was, Eleanor had stopped thinking her life mattered somewhere around the time the rumors started. She'd become so focused on survival, on getting through each day without breaking, that happiness had seemed like a luxury for other people. But seeing Sebastian again had cracked something open inside her, a possibility she'd thought dead. "He wants to call on me tomorrow," she said quietly. Catherine's face lit up. "You have to receive him." "I shouldn't." "But you want to." Eleanor closed her eyes. "Yes, I want to." "Then do it. Let him visit. Talk to him properly. And if society doesn't like it, they can go hang." Despite everything, Eleanor laughed. "When did you become so rebellious?" "I learned from the best." Catherine squeezed her hand. "Say yes, Eleanor. Take the chance. You've been brave about everything else. Be brave about this, too." Sebastian arrived at precisely 2 o'clock the next afternoon, driving himself in a small curricle rather than the ostentatious family carriage. Eleanor watched from the window as he climbed down, straightened his coat, and approached her door with the confidence of a man who'd never been refused anything in his life. She dressed carefully, not in mourning this time, but a deep blue day dress that made her feel almost human again. Mrs. Davies had insisted on styling her hair, muttering about presenting a proper appearance. Now, as the knock came, Eleanor felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "Show him to the drawing room," she told Mrs. Davies, "and bring tea." "Yes, my lady, though I'd suggest keeping the door open, for propriety's sake." Eleanor managed a wry smile. "A bit late for propriety, don't you think?" But she left the door ajar anyway, aware that every detail would be reported to someone, somewhere. London's servants were the true keepers of secrets, and the quickest to spread them when properly motivated. Sebastian stood when she entered, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. He seemed different in daylight, more real somehow, less the polished duke and more just a man. "Eleanor." "Sebastian, you came." "I said I would." "Yes, but I hoped you'd come to your senses." She gestured to the settee. "Please sit." He sat, but his eyes never left her face. "I've read the papers." "Then you know what a disaster this is becoming." "I know what they're saying. I don't particularly care." Eleanor sank into the chair opposite him, suddenly exhausted. "You should care. Your reputation will survive. Or it won't. Either way, I'm here." Mrs. Davies brought tea, setting it down with pointed precision before retreating. Eleanor poured with shaking hands, grateful for something to do. "Sugar?" she asked. "2, no milk." He smiled slightly. "You remembered. Some things you don't forget." They drank in silence for a moment. Outside, rain continued to fall, turning the street to mud. "I've been thinking," Sebastian said finally, "about what you said, about destroying my reputation by association with you. And I think you're probably right. Society will punish me for defending you. I'll lose friends, possibly business connections. My mother will be horrified." He set down his cup. "But here's what I realized. I don't want a reputation built on abandoning people when they become inconvenient, and I don't want friends who would ask me to do that." That's very noble, also very naive. Perhaps, but I've spent 5 years being practical and miserable. I'd rather be naive and alive. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "You barely know me anymore. I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago." "Neither am I, so let's get to know who we are now. And if you don't like what you find, then at least I'll know." "But Eleanor," he leaned forward, his expression intense. "I need you to be honest with me about everything. About your marriage, about Thomas's death, about what really happened. I can't fight shadows." She'd known this conversation would come, had dreaded it, but sitting here across from Sebastian, seeing the earnest determination in his eyes, she realized she wanted to tell him, wanted someone to finally know the truth. "Thomas was dying long before I married him," she began. "His physician told him he had perhaps 5 years, a congenital heart defect that had worsened with age. But Thomas was desperate to secure his estates, to leave a legacy, and my family needed the alliance." Sebastian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I knew he was ill when I accepted his proposal. What I didn't know was how cruel illness would make him, how paranoid and controlling." She stared into her teacup, watching steam rise. "He convinced himself I'd married him just to inherit when he died, that I was counting the days until his death. And the sicker he got, the worse he became." "Did he hurt you?" The question was quiet, but steel ran underneath. "Not physically, but he made sure I knew I was trapped. He changed his will repeatedly, adding conditions. I had to live in his house for 5 years after his death, or forfeit everything. Had to maintain his household exactly as he'd wanted it. Had to wear mourning for 3 full years." She finally looked up, meeting Sebastian's eyes. "He turned his death into my prison. And when he actually died, it was almost a relief, which made me feel like a monster." Eleanor set down her cup with trembling hands. "He collapsed in his study one evening. By the time I reached him, he was already gone. The physician confirmed it was his heart, exactly as predicted. But somehow the rumors started anyway. Poison, murder, a scheming wife who couldn't wait to be rid of him." Who started them? Does it matter? Once they began, they took on a life of their own. She wrapped her arms around herself. His family contested the will. They lost, but the damage was done. Everyone believed I'd somehow caused his death, and proving my innocence, how do you prove you didn't do something, especially when the court of public opinion has already convicted you? Sebastian stood abruptly, pacing to the window, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I'm going to find out who started those rumors, and I'm going to make them pay for it. Sebastian, no. That will only make things worse. Worse than what? Worse than you living like a prisoner in your own home? Worse than society treating you like a pariah based on lies? Yes. Because if you start making accusations, you'll be drawn deeper into the scandal. Right now, you're the noble duke defending a lady's honor. Start digging into Thomas's family and finances, and you'll become part of the circus. He turned to face her. Then I'll be part of it. Eleanor, I'm not walking away from this. From you. Why? The question burst from her raw and desperate. Why are you doing this? We had one night 5 years ago, a few stolen months before duty pulled us apart. That's not enough to risk everything for. Sebastian crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling in front of her chair so their eyes were level. That night 5 years ago, when you told me you had to marry Thomas, I let you go. I told myself it was the right thing to do, the honorable thing, and I have regretted it every single day since. Sebastian, let me finish. I stood there and watched you walk away into a marriage that made you miserable. I could have fought for you, should have fought for you, but I was young and stupid, and I believed that following the rules mattered more than following my heart. His hands came up, cupping her face gently. I won't make that mistake again. I don't care what it costs. I won't lose you twice. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling tears spill over. You're going to break both our hearts. Or we'll build something strong enough to survive the scandal, together. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from the front of the house. Raised voices, Mrs. Davies protesting, and then the drawing room door burst open. Eleanor's mother, Lady Margaret Ashworth, stood in the doorway like an avenging angel, her face flushed with fury. Behind her, Mrs. Davies looked apologetic and helpless. I'm sorry, my lady. I tried to stop her. It's all right, Mrs. Davies. Thank you. Eleanor stood, forcing her voice to remain calm, even as her stomach knotted. Mother, what an unexpected visit. Don't you dare act like nothing's wrong! Margaret stormed into the room, her gaze sweeping from Eleanor to Sebastian, still kneeling, and back again. I've been reading the papers. The whole city is talking about you and this Duke, and his ridiculous display at the Pemberton Gallery. Sebastian rose smoothly. Lady Ashworth, a pleasure to see you again. Don't you dare charm me, young man. I know what you're doing, and it's unconscionable. Mother, Eleanor began, but Margaret cut her off. You've ruined her once already. Filling her head with romantic nonsense 5 years ago, making her miserable in her marriage because she couldn't stop comparing poor Thomas to you. And now you come back, right when she's finally beginning to rebuild her life, and you destroy her reputation all over again. The accusation hit Sebastian like a physical blow. Eleanor saw him flinch, saw guilt flash across his face. That's not fair, Eleanor said sharply. Sebastian didn't what? Didn't make a spectacle of you in front of all of London society? Didn't publicly associate himself with a woman under a cloud of scandal? Margaret's voice shook. Do you know what this will do to Catherine? To your younger brother? They'll be tainted by association. No decent family will consider them suitable matches. Eleanor felt cold spreading through her chest. She hadn't thought about that, about how her scandal might splash onto her siblings. Mrs. Davies, she said quietly, please bring tea for my mother. I don't want tea. I want answers. But Margaret sank into a chair anyway, her anger giving way to something that looked like desperation. Eleanor, please, think about what you're doing. This man, however noble his intentions, cannot fix what's broken. He'll only make it worse. With all due respect, Lady Ashworth, Sebastian said, his voice careful but firm. Eleanor has done nothing wrong. She's been persecuted based on rumors and lies. Someone needs to stand up for her. And you think you're that someone? A duke who's never faced real adversity in his life? Margaret's laugh was bitter. You have no idea what you're up against. Society will chew you both up and spit you out. Then let it try. Noble words. But what happens when your friends abandon you? When your business partners pull their investments? When every door in London closes in your face? She turned to Eleanor. And you'll have to watch him suffer for your sake. Watch his life unravel because he was foolish enough to care about you. Is that what you want? Eleanor's hands clenched in her skirts. Of course not. Then end this, now, before more damage is done. The room fell silent except for the sound of rain against windows. Eleanor looked at Sebastian, saw him watching her with an expression that said he would accept whatever she decided, that he would fight for her or walk away, depending on what she asked. And in that moment, she realized something. Her mother was right. Being with Sebastian would cause him pain, would damage his reputation, possibly his future. Any rational person would walk away. But she was so tired of being rational, so tired of sacrificing her happiness for propriety. No, she said quietly. Margaret stared at her. What? No, Mother, I won't end this. Eleanor stood, her voice growing stronger. I've spent 3 years hiding, 3 years accepting punishment for crimes I didn't commit, 3 years letting other people's opinions dictate my life. I'm done. Eleanor, I love him. The words came out fierce and certain. I loved him 5 years ago, and I love him now. And if society wants to crucify me for that, then let them. At least I'll have tried. Sebastian's expression transformed, shock giving way to joy so pure it made Eleanor's breath catch. Margaret looked between them, her face pale. You're both fools. Probably, Eleanor agreed, but we're fools together. Her mother stood, gathering her dignity around her like armor. Very well. But don't come crying to me when this all falls apart. I've done my duty warning you. What happens next is on your own head. She swept from the room, leaving Eleanor and Sebastian alone in the echoing silence. Did you mean it? Sebastian asked finally. About loving me? Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. He closed the distance between them, pulling her into his arms. Say it again. I love you, she whispered against his chest. I'm terrified, and it's probably a disaster, but I love you. I love you too. He pulled back just enough to see her face. And whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Through the window, Eleanor could see neighbors gathering, pointing at Sebastian's curricle parked outside her house. The gossip was already spreading, rippling outward like stones thrown in a pond. The storm was coming. But for the first time in 3 years, Eleanor felt ready to weather it. The neighbors weren't just gathering anymore. They were forming a crowd. Through the rain-streaked window, Eleanor watched them huddle under umbrellas, their faces turned toward her house like spectators at an execution. A woman in a green bonnet pointed directly at Sebastian's curricle, her mouth moving rapidly as she spoke to the others. I should go, Sebastian said, though his arms remained around her. Before this gets worse. It's already worse. Eleanor pulled back, forcing herself to think clearly despite the emotions churning inside her. If you leave now, it looks like we're ashamed, like we're hiding. What do you suggest? She took a breath, then made a decision that felt both reckless and inevitable. Walk out with me, right now. Let them see us together in daylight. Let them see we have nothing to hide. Sebastian's eyes searched hers. You're sure? No, but I'm done being afraid. They walked to the door together, Eleanor's hand tucked into the crook of Sebastian's arm. Mrs. Davies appeared in the hallway, her expression worried. My lady, perhaps you should wait until... Until what? Until they stop watching? They'll never stop watching. Eleanor managed a smile. It's all right, Mrs. Davies. We're simply going for a walk. The housekeeper's face softened. Then take your good cloak, the one with the hood, and don't let them see you flinch. Eleanor squeezed her hand gratefully, then allowed Sebastian to help her with the cloak. When they stepped outside, the crowd fell silent, a hush so complete that Eleanor could hear the rain pattering on umbrellas, the distant clop of horse hooves on cobblestones. Sebastian kept his pace measured, unhurried, as if they were strolling through Hyde Park on a pleasant afternoon rather than running a gauntlet of judgment. Eleanor forced herself to keep her head high, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Murderer," someone whispered. The word carried clearly in the silence. Sebastian stopped walking. Eleanor felt him tense, felt the anger radiating from him like heat. "Don't," she murmured. "Keep walking." "Who said that?" Sebastian's voice cut through the rain. "Who called her a murderer?" The crowd shifted, uncomfortable. No one answered. "That's what I thought." Sebastian's gaze swept over them, cold as winter. "It's easy to make accusations when you're hiding in a crowd. But let me be clear. Anyone who slanders Lady Ashford will answer to me personally. Is that understood?" A man in the back, someone Eleanor didn't recognize, stepped forward. "Defending her won't change what she is, Your Grace. We all know what happened to Lord Ashford." "Do you? Then please enlighten me. What exactly do you know?" "That he died mysteriously, that she inherited everything, that she couldn't wait to get back into society and find her next victim." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Sebastian's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, a brief squeeze of support before he addressed the crowd again. Lord Thomas Ashford died of a congenital heart condition that had been documented by his physician for years. The coroner confirmed natural causes. There was no mystery, no poison, no crime. Just a tragedy that vultures like you turned into entertainment. His voice dropped, becoming dangerous. "And if I hear anyone, repeating these lies, I will pursue legal action for defamation. I suggest you all go home and find something more productive to do with your time." The crowd began to disperse, muttering among themselves. But Eleanor saw the looks they shot back over their shoulders. Anger, resentment, and something worse. Fear. Of Sebastian's power, perhaps, but also of what he represented. A crack in the social order they depended on. "That was foolish," Eleanor said as they continued walking. "Now they'll hate you too." "Good. I'd rather be hated with you than celebrated without you." They walked in silence for several blocks, the rain gradually tapering to a drizzle. Eleanor's mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. Sebastian had publicly defended her again, more forcefully this time, with threats of legal action. There was no going back from this. No pretending it was just a chance encounter at a gallery. "Sebastian, we need to talk about what happens next." "We face it together. That's what happens next." "I'm serious. Your mother, have you told her about us?" His silence answered the question. "You need to," Eleanor said firmly, "before she hears it from someone else. And we need a plan. Because defending me in front of crowds won't be enough. The rumors are too entrenched. Then we'll dig up the truth and shove it down their throats." Eleanor almost smiled at the vehemence in his voice. "And how do you propose we do that?" "I have an investigator. Very discreet. He's helped me with estate matters before. I'll hire him to look into who started the rumors about you, find the source, expose the lies. That could take months and cost a fortune." "I don't care." They had reached a small park, deserted in the rain. Sebastian led her to a covered bench beneath a massive oak, its branches providing additional shelter from the weather. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I'm not doing this out of some misguided sense of chivalry or because I feel guilty about the past. I'm doing this because I love you, and because what's happening to you is wrong, and because I'm tired of living in a society that values reputation over justice. That's a very idealistic view. Maybe. But isn't that what you used to love about me? That I believed things could be better?" Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I loved everything about you. That was the problem. It doesn't have to be a problem anymore." He took her hands. "Marry me." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What?" "Marry me. Not next year after the scandal dies down. Now, this month. Let me make you my duchess, and then let's see society try to tear you down." "Sebastian, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life. We've been reunited for 3 days. We can't possibly—" "Why not? We wasted 5 years already. I'm not wasting another 5 waiting for the perfect moment. There is no perfect moment. There's only now." Eleanor stared at him, her mind reeling. Marriage. To Sebastian. It was everything she'd dreamed of 5 years ago, everything she'd thought lost forever. But the reality of it, the scandal it would cause, the enemies it would make. Your family will disown you, she said weakly. My mother will rant and threaten, then eventually accept it. She always does. And I have cousins who can inherit if she truly cuts me off. I don't care about that. The society can rot. Eleanor, please, I know this is sudden. I know there are 1,000 practical reasons to wait, but I also know that I love you and that life is too short to waste on being careful. His grip on her hands tightened. Say yes. Take a chance on us. She looked into his eyes, saw the hope and determination there, the absolute certainty that this was right. And something inside her, something that had been locked away and buried under years of caution and fear, cracked open. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I'll marry you. Sebastian's face transformed with joy. He pulled her to him, kissing her with a desperation that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. We'll do it properly, Sebastian said. I'll speak to the Archbishop, get a special license. 2 weeks. Give me 2 weeks to arrange everything. Sebastian, if we're going to do this, we do it right. I won't have people saying we rushed into marriage because I'm pregnant with someone else's child, or some other vile rumor. Then what do you suggest? Eleanor's mind raced, turning over possibilities. If they were going to make this work, truly work, they needed more than just Sebastian's protection. They needed proof, evidence that would silence the rumors once and for all. The investigator you mentioned, hire him. But don't just have him look into who started the rumors. Have him find Thomas's physician, get a sworn statement about his condition, find the coroner's report, get written documentation of everything. She stood, pacing beneath the oak's shelter. And we need character witnesses. People who knew Thomas and me during our marriage. Servants who can testify that I nursed him, that I tried to save him. Sebastian was watching her with something like admiration. You've thought about this before. I've had 3 years to think about nothing else, but I never had the resources to fight back. Now I do. She turned to face him. If we're doing this, getting married, facing down society, we do it with ammunition. We build a case so strong that anyone who questions it looks like a fool. I'll start tomorrow. But Eleanor, even with evidence, some people won't believe it. Some people will always choose the scandal over the truth. I know, but at least we'll have tried, and at least, her voice softened, at least I'll have you. They walked back to Eleanor's house through streets that seemed quieter now, as if the confrontation had drained the energy from the neighborhood's gossips. At her door, Sebastian kissed her hand with formal propriety. I'll call on you tomorrow, he said, and every day after until we're married. That will cause more talk. Good. Let them talk themselves hoarse. I don't care anymore. After he left, Eleanor stood in her entryway, still feeling the warmth of his kiss on her hand. Mrs. Davies appeared from the kitchen, her expression carefully neutral. Tea, my lady. Something stronger, I think. And Mrs. Davies? Eleanor turned to face her. I'm getting married, to the Duke. The housekeeper's face broke into the first genuine smile Eleanor had seen from her in years. About time, if you ask me. I'll fetch the good brandy. This calls for celebration. But celebration proved premature. So, the next morning brought a letter that changed everything. Eleanor was at breakfast, reading the latest round of gossip columns, now filled with speculation about her relationship with Sebastian, when Mrs. Davies brought in the post on a silver tray. This one came by special messenger, my lady, marked urgent. Eleanor broke the seal, expecting perhaps a note from Sebastian or a threatening letter from some society matron. Instead, she found legal documents bearing the crest of Thomas's family, the Ashfords of Westmoreland. Her hands began to shake as she read. The Ashford family was contesting Thomas's will. Again. But this time, they'd found something new. An unsigned codicil allegedly written by Thomas in the weeks before his death, stating that if he died under suspicious circumstances, all his property would revert to his younger brother Geoffrey. Eleanor's vision blurred. This couldn't be happening. The will had been settled 2 years ago. Everything had been legally finalized. She forced herself to keep reading. The family's solicitor claimed they'd found the codicil among Thomas's papers during a recent cleaning of the family estate. They were petitioning the courts to reopen the case, and they were demanding that Eleanor vacate the townhouse and surrender all assets pending the investigation. My lady, you've gone pale. What's wrong? Eleanor couldn't answer. The letter slipped from her fingers onto the breakfast table. Everything she'd built, her small measure of independence, the security that had let her even consider a future with Sebastian, was being ripped away. Worse, the timing was devastating. The letter made it clear that news of her relationship with Sebastian had precipitated this action. The Ashford family was painting her as an opportunistic widow who'd murdered Thomas and was now trying to secure another wealthy husband before her crimes caught up with her. Mrs. Davies picked up the letter, scanning it quickly. Her face hardened. This is ridiculous. You were exonerated. The courts ruled in your favor. They're claiming new evidence. An unsigned codicil that conveniently appears just as I'm starting to rebuild my life. Eleanor stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her tea. I need to send for my solicitor, and I need to tell Sebastian. You don't think... Mrs. Davies hesitated. You don't think the Duke's attention might have made things worse? Eleanor had been thinking exactly that. If she'd stayed quiet, stayed hidden, the Ashfords might have left her alone. But now, seeing her with Sebastian, they'd realized they were losing their chance to destroy her. This was their last desperate play. Before she could respond, another knock came at the door. Mrs. Davies went to answer it, returning moments later with a grim expression. More visitors, my lady, the Ashford family solicitor. He says he has a court order requiring you to vacate the premises within 30 days. Eleanor felt the room spin. 30 days. They were forcing her out of her own home. Show him in. The solicitor was a thin, severe man named Mr. Grimshaw, who looked like he enjoyed delivering bad news. He handed Eleanor additional papers with the cold efficiency of someone performing an unpleasant but necessary task. Lady Ashford, I'm authorized to inform you that the Ashford family is pursuing full restitution of all assets granted to you under the late Lord Ashford's will. This includes the townhouse, its contents, and all financial holdings. On what grounds? The will was validated by the courts. On the grounds of the newly discovered codicil, which clearly indicates Lord Ashford's concerns about the circumstances of his death. Combined with the rumors surrounding your conduct, rumors are not evidence. Perhaps not, but they establish a pattern of behavior that supports the family's claim, particularly given your recent very public association with the Duke of Hawthorne. Grimshaw's smile was thin and cruel. One might wonder if you targeted His Grace just as you allegedly targeted Lord Ashford. Eleanor's temper, held carefully in check for 3 years, finally snapped. Get out. I beg your pardon? You heard me. Get out of my house. If your employers want to challenge the will, they can do it through proper legal channels. But I will not stand here and be accused of targeting anyone. The court order says I have 30 days, which means I have 30 days and you have no business being here now. Leave, before I have you thrown out. Grimshaw gathered his papers with exaggerated care. Very well, Lady Ashford, but you should know the family has also petitioned for an inquest into Lord Ashford's death. They're claiming new medical evidence suggests poisoning. The authorities will be contacting you shortly. He left before Eleanor could respond, the door clicking shut behind him with ominous finality. Poisoning. They were actually claiming she'd poisoned Thomas. Eleanor sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. This wasn't just about money or property anymore. This was about her freedom. If an inquest found evidence of poisoning, real or manufactured, she could face criminal charges. She could hang. The thought crystallized everything. She'd been naive to think love and determination would be enough. The forces arrayed against her were too powerful, too entrenched. And now, by accepting Sebastian's proposal, she dragged him into a disaster that could destroy them both. Mrs. Davies knelt beside her chair. We'll fight this, my lady. We'll find the best solicitor in London. With what money? If they freeze my assets, I can't even pay for legal representation. Eleanor's laugh came out bitter. And even if I could, what jury will believe me over a respected family? Especially now that I'm engaged to a duke? It looks exactly like they're claiming that I'm a fortune hunter who murdered her husband. You didn't. I know I didn't, but knowing the truth and proving it are different things. Eleanor stood, her mind racing through impossible options. I need to see Sebastian. I need to tell him what's happening before he hears it from someone else. She was reaching for her cloak when Sebastian's carriage pulled up outside. Through the window, she watched him descend, his expression already dark with anger. Someone had told him. He burst through the door without waiting to be announced, a newspaper clutched in his fist. "Have you seen this?" Eleanor took the paper. The headline made her stomach drop. "Black Widow strikes again. Ashford family demands murder investigation." The article was brutal. It detailed the newly discovered codicil, Thomas's family's allegations, and their claim that Eleanor had poisoned her husband to inherit his estate. And it prominently featured her relationship with Sebastian, painting her as a woman who'd seduced a duke to secure her next fortune. "It's all lies," Sebastian said, throwing the paper aside. "All of it. We'll sue them for libel." "We can't. Not if they've filed official court documents. That gives them legal protection." Eleanor forced herself to think clearly despite the panic clawing at her throat. "Sebastian, this changes everything. If there's a murder investigation, there won't be, because you didn't murder anyone." "That might not matter. They claim to have new medical evidence. What if they've bribed a physician to lie? What if they've manufactured evidence?" Sebastian went very still. "They wouldn't dare." "Wouldn't they? Thomas's family has been trying to break his will for 3 years. They failed every legal challenge. This is their last option. Destroy my credibility so completely that no court will uphold my claim to his estate." "Then we destroy them first." Sebastian's voice turned cold with fury. "I'll hire the best investigators, the best solicitors. We'll prove the codicil is a forgery. We'll discredit every witness they produce." "And if that's not enough?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Sebastian crossed to her, taking her hands. "Then we run. Leave England entirely. Start over somewhere they can't touch us." Eleanor stared at him, shocked. "You would give up everything? Your title? Your estates? Your entire life?" "In a heartbeat. If it meant keeping you safe." She pulled away, shaking her head. "No, I won't let you do that. I won't let you throw away your life for me. Eleanor, listen to me." She turned to face him, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill over. "If we run, they win. They'll say it proves my guilt. And you'll be branded a fool who was seduced by a murderer. Your name will be destroyed." "I don't care about my name." "Well, I do. Because it's all I'll have left if this goes wrong." She wiped at her eyes angrily. "Don't you see? They've backed us into a corner. If we fight, we risk everything on a trial that might not go our way. If we run, we lose everything anyway." Sebastian grabbed her shoulders gently. "Then what do you want to do?" Eleanor took a shaking breath. What she wanted was to wake up and find this was all a nightmare. What she wanted was for the past 3 years to disappear, for Thomas to have died quietly without scandal, for society to have left her alone. What she wanted didn't matter. "I want proof," she said finally. "Real, irrefutable proof that I'm innocent, not just of murder, of everything they're accusing me of. The codicil is a forgery? We prove it. They claim new medical evidence? We get better evidence. They say I'm a fortune hunter? We show exactly how little I inherited after Thomas's debts were paid. That will take time, resources. Then we'd better get started." She pulled away from him, her mind already working through the logistics. "You said you have an investigator. Hire him immediately. Have him find Thomas's original physician, the one who documented his heart condition years before I married him, and get the coroner's full report, not just the summary." Sebastian was watching her with a mixture of concern and admiration. "What are you going to do?" "Something I should have done 3 years ago." Eleanor straightened her spine, feeling determination replace fear. "I'm going to fight back." Over the next week, Eleanor transformed from a woman hiding from scandal into a general planning a war. She hired the sharpest solicitor in London, a woman named Margaret Blackwood, who'd made her reputation defending women in estate disputes. Together, they began building a case that would either save Eleanor or condemn her completely. The investigator Sebastian hired, a former Bow Street runner named Jack Morrison, uncovered information that made Eleanor's blood boil. The codicil was indeed a forgery. Morrison traced the paper to a stationer's shop that hadn't existed until 6 months after Thomas's death. The handwriting, while close to Thomas's, showed subtle differences that an expert could identify. But proving it in court would be another matter entirely. The Ashford family has resources, Blackwood warned during one of their meetings in Eleanor's study. They can hire their own experts who'll swear the codicil's genuine. It'll come down to which experts the jury believes. Then we need more than just the forgery, Eleanor said. We need to show why they created it. Morrison leaned forward. I've been looking into Jeffrey Ashford's finances, Thomas's younger brother. He's drowning in gambling debts, owes money to some very dangerous people. How much? 30,000 pounds, maybe more, the kind of debt that gets people killed if they don't pay. Eleanor felt a cold satisfaction settle over her. So he needed Thomas's estate, not just wanted it, needed it desperately enough to forge a codicil and accuse me of murder. That's my assessment, but proving he forged the document will be difficult. He's been careful. Then we don't prove he did it directly. We prove he had motive and opportunity, and we let the jury draw their own conclusions. Eleanor turned to Blackwood. Can you get his financial records entered as evidence? If we can tie them to the case, it's a stretch, but I might be able to argue they establish a pattern of desperation. The meetings continued late into the night, Eleanor and her team piecing together a defense that felt more like building a fortress stone by stone. Sebastian attended most of them, his presence a steady anchor even as the scandal around them grew worse. Because it did grow worse, much worse. The investigation into Thomas's death was officially reopened. Eleanor was summoned for questioning by magistrates who looked at her with barely concealed suspicion. She answered every question with calm precision, but she could see the doubt in their eyes. The accusation had already convicted her in their minds, and society turned on her with vicious enthusiasm. Invitations that had slowly started arriving after her reappearance dried up completely. Shops refused her custom. People crossed the street to avoid her. Someone threw a rock through her window with a note calling her murderess tied around it. Sebastian faced his own backlash. Friends stopped calling. Business associates distanced themselves. His mother sent a letter so scathing that Sebastian burned it rather than let Eleanor see the contents. This was a mistake, Eleanor said one evening as they reviewed documents in her study. I should never have said yes to your proposal. Should never have dragged you into this. Sebastian looked up from the financial records he'd been examining. You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose this. You chose based on incomplete information. You didn't know it would get this bad. Eleanor, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. I knew exactly how bad it could get. I just didn't care. And I still don't. Your mother will survive her disappointment. She survived worse. He reached across the table to take her hand. Stop trying to protect me. We're in this together. Before Eleanor could respond, Morrison burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement. I found him, Thomas's original physician, Dr. Edmund Hartley. He's retired to Bath, but he's willing to testify. Eleanor's heart leaped. What did he say? That he diagnosed Thomas with a congenital heart defect 15 years ago. That he warned Thomas repeatedly to reduce stress and avoid strenuous activity, and that he's been wondering for 3 years why no one contacted him about the death, since he'd predicted it would happen eventually. This is it, Blackwood said, standing. This is exactly what we need. A physician who documented Thomas's condition long before you married him, Lady Ashford. His testimony will demolish their case. Unless they convince him to change his story, Eleanor said cautiously. If Jeffrey gets to him first, he won't. I've got a man watching the good doctor's house. Anyone from the Ashford family tries to make contact, we'll know immediately. Morrison grinned. We're not amateurs, my lady. For the first time in days, Eleanor allowed herself to hope. They had evidence, real evidence that could counter the accusations. Combined with proof of Jeffrey's debts and the forged codicil, they might actually win this. But 3 days before the inquest was scheduled to begin, disaster struck. Eleanor was working in her study when Mrs. Davies rushed in, her face pale with shock. My lady, there are constables at the door. They have a warrant for your arrest. The world tilted. What? They're saying new evidence has come to light. Something about poison found in Thomas's remains. Sebastian, who'd been reviewing documents with Morrison in the corner, shot to his feet. That's impossible. Thomas was buried 3 years ago. How could they possibly— I don't know, Your Grace, but they're insisting she come with them immediately. Eleanor stood on shaking legs. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading. They'd actually done it, manufactured evidence convincing enough to have her arrested. Sebastian grabbed his coat. "I'm coming with you." "No." Eleanor's voice came out surprisingly steady. "You'll make it worse. If you're there when they arrest me, the papers will say you were trying to interfere with justice." "I don't care what the papers say." "I do, because right now you're the only thing standing between me and complete ruin. If they destroy your credibility too, we have nothing left." She turned to Blackwood. "Go with me. Make sure they follow proper procedure." The solicitor nodded grimly. "Of course." The constables were apologetic but firm. They led Eleanor out to a waiting carriage while neighbors gathered to watch. She kept her head high, refusing to show weakness even as terror clawed at her insides. She was taken to a holding cell in Newgate Prison, a small, cold room that smelled of mildew and despair. Blackwood stayed as long as the guards allowed, promising to return with a plan. "We'll fight this," the solicitor said fiercely. "Whatever evidence they claim to have, we'll discredit it." "What if you can't?" Blackwood hesitated. "Then we prepare for trial, and we pray the jury values truth over spectacle." After she left, Eleanor sat alone in the cell, watching shadows lengthen across stone walls. This was what her life had become, from Duchess-to-be to prisoner in the space of a week. She thought about Sebastian, wondered what he was doing right now. Probably tearing London apart looking for answers, probably blaming himself for not protecting her. She thought about her family, her mother's warnings, Catherine's hope, her younger brother who'd stopped speaking to her entirely when the scandal broke. She thought about Thomas, dying alone in his study while she'd been in another part of the house. Had he been afraid? Had he known what was coming, or had his heart simply stopped, quick and final, giving him no time to make peace with the end? She'd never know. Just like she'd never know if fighting back had been brave or stupid, if accepting Sebastian's proposal had been love or madness. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside her cell. Eleanor looked up, expecting Blackwood or perhaps a guard bringing food. Instead, she saw a figure she recognized from society gatherings, Lord Richard Pemberton, Lady Cordelia's husband. He stopped outside her cell, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Lady Ashford, or should I say, prisoner Ashford. Eleanor stood, moving to the bars. "What do you want?" "To offer you a choice." Richard's smile was cold. "You see, my family has certain connections with the Ashford family, and we've been discussing your situation." "How generous of you." "Don't be flippant. We could make all of this go away. The charges, the inquest, even the questions about the codicil, all dropped. You'd be free to go." Eleanor's heart pounded. "In exchange for what?" "Leave the Duke alone. Publicly break your engagement. Disappear from London and never return. Do that, and we'll ensure the evidence against you vanishes." There it was, the real play. This wasn't about justice or truth. It was about power, about society's elite punishing someone who dared to step outside the lines they'd drawn. "And if I refuse?" Richard's expression hardened. "Then you hang. We'll make sure of it. The evidence we've planted is very convincing. Even your clever solicitor won't be able to overcome it." "You're admitting to manufacturing evidence?" "I'm offering you a way out. Take it or leave it." Eleanor stared at him, her mind racing. They'd miscalculated. They thought she'd choose freedom over love, survival over Sebastian. They didn't understand that she'd already made that choice 5 years ago, and it had nearly destroyed her. She wasn't making it again. "No," she said clearly. Richard blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "I said no. I won't leave Sebastian. I won't disappear, and I won't let you and your corrupt friends dictate my life." Eleanor stepped closer to the bars, her voice dropping to ice. "So, go ahead. Bring your manufactured evidence. Bring your bought witnesses. We'll see whose story the jury believes. You're making a fatal mistake." "Maybe, but at least it's my mistake to make." Richard stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Eleanor sat back down on the cold stone bench, her whole body shaking with the enormity of what she'd just done. She'd refused her only way out, chosen to fight even knowing she might lose, chosen Sebastian and truth over safety. It was the most terrifying decision of her life. And for the first time in 3 years, she felt completely, absolutely free. The stone bench beneath Eleanor grew colder as night settled over Newgate Prison. She pulled her cloak tighter, watching moonlight creep across the cell floor through a barred window too high to reach. Somewhere in the building, a woman wailed, grief or madness, Eleanor couldn't tell. The sound echoed off stone walls until it became something inhuman. She'd made her choice, refused the devil's bargain Richard Pemberton had offered, and now she would face whatever consequences came. Footsteps approached again, multiple sets this time. Eleanor stood, expecting guards or perhaps Blackwood returning with news. Instead, Sebastian appeared in the corridor, his face haggard in the torchlight, followed by Morrison and a guard who looked distinctly uncomfortable. 5 minutes, the guard muttered, and I was never here. Sebastian pressed something into the man's hand, coins, Eleanor assumed, before the guard retreated down the corridor. Then Sebastian was at the bars, his hands reaching through to grip hers. Are you hurt? Did they... I'm fine. Eleanor squeezed his fingers, drinking in the sight of him. How did you get in here? Money and desperation make excellent keys. His eyes searched her face. Blackwood told me about the charges. Poison allegedly found in Thomas's remains. It's absurd. It's manufactured. Richard Pemberton came to see me an hour ago. He admitted they planted the evidence. Sebastian's expression went deadly cold. He what? Eleanor quickly recounted the conversation, watching fury build in Sebastian's eyes with each word. By the time she finished, his jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. He threatened you, tried to blackmail you into leaving me. Sebastian's voice came out dangerously quiet. I'm going to destroy him. Sebastian, no. That's exactly what they want. For you to do something rash that damages your credibility. I don't care about my credibility. I care about getting you out of here. Morrison stepped forward. Your Grace, if I may. Lady Ashford is right. Going after Pemberton directly would be a mistake. But what he told her, that's valuable. He admitted to manufacturing evidence. That's a crime. Against a prisoner with no witnesses, Eleanor said bitterly. My word against a lord's. We all know who they'd believe. Unless we can prove it. Morrison pulled a notebook from his coat. I've been digging into the Ashford family's activities over the past month. There are gaps, time periods where Geoffrey was supposedly in London, but no one can account for his whereabouts. I'm willing to bet one of those gaps corresponds to when the evidence was planted. Sebastian released Eleanor's hands reluctantly, turning to face Morrison. What do you need? Access to the coroner's records. The original examination reports from when Thomas died. If poison was actually present, it would have shown up then. The fact that it's appearing now, 3 years later, proves someone tampered with the evidence. The coroner won't give those up easily, Eleanor said, especially not to help me. He will if a duke asks nicely, or not so nicely. Sebastian's eyes gleamed with determination. I'll go first thing tomorrow. What else? Morrison consulted his notes. The physician, Dr. Hartley, is still willing to testify, but he's nervous. The Ashford family has been making inquiries about him. We need to get him somewhere safe until the inquest. Bring him to Hawthorne House. No one will touch him there. Your Grace, that will create its own scandal. Let it. I'm done playing by their rules. Sebastian turned back to Eleanor, his expression softening. We're getting you out of here. I don't care what it takes. Sebastian, listen to me. Eleanor gripped the bars, forcing him to meet her eyes. You can't break me out or bribe the magistrates or do anything that would make you look guilty by association. The only way through this is to fight it legally, with evidence and truth. That could take weeks. They might not even grant you bail. Then I wait. I've survived worse than a cold cell. That's not the point. It's exactly the point. They think they can scare me into submission by locking me up, but I won't give them the satisfaction. Eleanor felt something fierce rising in her chest, a defiance that had been building for 3 years. I'm done being afraid of them, done letting society dictate my worth. If this is the price of fighting back, I'll pay it. Sebastian stared at her, and Eleanor saw the moment he understood. This wasn't just about proving her innocence anymore. It was about refusing to be broken by a system designed to crush anyone who stepped outside its narrow boundaries. All right, he said finally. We do this your way. But Eleanor, I'm not abandoning you, not for a moment. Every day I'll be working to get you free. I know. That's what terrifies me. She managed a small smile. Promise me you'll be careful, that you won't do anything reckless. I promise to be as careful as necessary, which might not be very careful at all. Despite everything, Eleanor laughed. The sound echoed strangely in the stone corridor, too bright for such a dark place. The guard reappeared, looking nervous. Time's up, Your Grace. Sebastian pressed his forehead against the bars, as close to Eleanor as he could get. I love you. Remember that, whatever happens. I love you too. Now go. And Sebastian, win. She watched him walk away, Morrison at his side, already discussing strategy. When the corridor fell silent again, Eleanor sat back down on the bench, feeling strangely calm. The fear that had gripped her earlier had transformed into something harder, sharper. They wanted a fight? She'd give them one they'd never forget. The inquest began 3 days later in a courtroom packed with spectators hungry for scandal. Eleanor was brought in shackles, an unnecessary humiliation that drew gasps from the crowd. She kept her head high, refusing to flinch as catcalls and whispers followed her to the defendant's table. Blackwood was already there, papers spread across the surface, her expression grimly determined. They're playing dirty. The magistrate is Lord Henry Ashford, Geoffrey's uncle. I filed an objection based on conflict of interest, but it was denied. Of course it was. Eleanor scanned the courtroom, finding Sebastian in the front row. He looked like he'd aged years in the past 3 days, dark circles under his eyes, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. Their eyes met, and he gave her a small nod of encouragement. The magistrate entered, a heavy-set man with a florid face and cold eyes that dismissed Eleanor with a single glance. This inquest is called to examine evidence regarding the death of Lord Thomas Ashford and allegations of poisoning. The Crown will present its case first. The prosecutor was a man named Whitfield, known for his theatricality and his perfect record in securing convictions. He stood, adjusting his robes with dramatic flair. Gentlemen of the jury, I present to you a tale of greed, manipulation, and cold-blooded murder. Lady Eleanor Ashford married a dying man, nursed him with apparent devotion, and then, when his death would serve her purposes, administered poison to hasten his end. Objection, Blackwood said sharply. The prosecutor is presenting theory as fact. No evidence of poisoning has been established. We will establish it presently, Whitfield said smoothly. I call Dr. Bernard Morsley to the stand. A thin man with nervous hands took the witness box. He identified himself as a physician hired by the Ashford family to examine Thomas's remains. And what did you find, Dr. Morsley? Traces of arsenic. Not enough to be immediately fatal, but consistent with slow poisoning over time. The courtroom erupted. Eleanor felt Blackwood's hand on her arm, steadying her. How certain are you of this finding? Absolutely certain. I conducted 3 separate tests, all yielding the same result. Whitfield turned to the jury with satisfaction. Arsenic, the poisoner's weapon of choice, a slow, subtle, and nearly impossible to detect without modern testing methods. Lady Ashford had access, opportunity, and motive. The evidence speaks for itself. Blackwood stood for cross-examination, her voice crisp and professional. Dr. Morsley, when did Lord Ashford die? 3 years ago, I believe. And when did you conduct your examination? Last month. 3 years after burial. In what condition were the remains? Morsley shifted uncomfortably. Naturally degraded, but sufficient for testing. Sufficient for testing, or sufficient for contamination? Blackwood pulled out a document. I have here a report from the original coroner, Dr. James Whitmore, who performed a thorough examination within 24 hours of death. He found no evidence of poisoning, no arsenic, nothing suspicious. How do you explain that? Perhaps his tests were not sensitive enough. Dr. Whitmore is one of the most respected coroners in England. Are you suggesting he's incompetent? No, but then how did arsenic suddenly appear in remains that have been buried for 3 years? Is it not possible, Dr. Morsley, that the samples you tested were contaminated? That someone deliberately introduced arsenic to frame my client? Whitfield jumped to his feet. Objection! The defense is making wild accusations. The defense is questioning the validity of suspiciously timed evidence, Blackwood shot back. Dr. Morsley, who hired you for this examination? The Ashford family. And who provided the samples you tested? Jeffrey Ashford personally delivered them to my laboratory. I see. So the man who stands to inherit everything if my client is convicted of murder personally handled the evidence you tested. And you see no potential for bias or manipulation in that scenario? Morsley's face flushed. I conducted my tests professionally. I'm sure you did. But you can't account for what happened to those samples before they reached you, can you? The physician had no answer. Blackwood dismissed him with contempt, and Eleanor felt the first flutter of hope. The defense had landed a blow. But Whitfield wasn't finished. Over the next hour, he paraded a series of witnesses, servants who testified to Eleanor's cold demeanor during Thomas's final days, society matrons who claimed she'd seemed eager to return to London, even a shopkeeper who swore Eleanor had purchased rat poison 6 months before Thomas's death. For rodents in the kitchen? Eleanor whispered to Blackwood. The cook can confirm it. We'll call her as a rebuttal witness. When court adjourned for the day, Eleanor was returned to her cell exhausted and shaken. The prosecution's case was weak on actual evidence but strong on innuendo and character assassination. If the jury believed the narrative Whitfield was weaving, facts wouldn't matter. Sebastian visited that evening, accompanied by Morrison, and surprising news. We found something, Morrison said without preamble. Jeffrey Ashford made a payment to Dr. Morsley 2 months ago, £10,000 deposited in a private account. We have the bank records. Eleanor's heart leaped. That proves he bribed the doctor. It suggests it strongly. But Morsley could claim it was payment for services rendered. We need more. Morrison pulled out additional papers. But here's where it gets interesting. That same week, Jeffrey also paid £5,000 to a chemist shop known for dealing in poisons. The owner is less than reputable. He bought the arsenic, Sebastian said, his voice tight with fury. He bought it and planted it in the samples he gave Morsley. Almost certainly, but proving it will be difficult. The chemist won't testify. He'd be admitting to criminal activity, and Jeffrey will deny everything. Eleanor's mind raced. We don't need the chemist to testify. We just need to show the pattern. Jeffrey desperately needs money. He has opportunity and motive to forge the codicil and manufacture evidence. The jury might not convict on that alone, but it creates reasonable doubt. There's more, Morrison continued. I tracked down Thomas's original physician, Dr. Hartley. He's prepared to testify that he diagnosed Thomas with a fatal heart condition 15 years before his death, that he warned Thomas repeatedly about the risk of sudden cardiac failure. His testimony directly contradicts the poisoning theory. When can he testify? Blackwood asked. Tomorrow, if you can get him on the schedule. I'll make it happen. That night, Eleanor allowed herself to hope. They had evidence, witnesses, a coherent defense. It wasn't guaranteed. Nothing in this nightmare was guaranteed. But it was a chance. The next morning brought an unexpected development. As Eleanor was escorted into the courtroom, she noticed the crowd had changed. More women now, many wearing blue ribbons, the color Eleanor had worn to the Pemberton Gallery. Catherine was among them, along with other young ladies Eleanor vaguely recognized from her brief return to society. Sebastian caught her eye and nodded toward the gallery. You have supporters, more than you know. Blackwood called Dr. Hartley as her first witness. The elderly physician took the stand with dignity, his white hair and gentle manner commanding immediate respect. Dr. Hartley, how long did you serve as Lord Thomas Ashford's physician? 23 years, until I retired 5 years ago. And during that time, did you diagnose any serious medical conditions? Yes. When Thomas was 30 years old, I discovered he had a congenital heart defect, a malformation of the mitral valve that made sudden death a constant risk. I informed him immediately and advised lifestyle changes to minimize the danger. What was Lord Ashford's response? He ignored my advice. He was a proud man, unwilling to accept limitations. Over the years, his condition worsened. I told him frankly that he likely had less than 10 years to live. Did you inform anyone else of this diagnosis? His family knew. I recommended they make appropriate arrangements. Blackwood let that sink in. So the Ashford family was aware that Thomas could die suddenly at any time. They were. And when he did die 3 years ago, were you surprised? Not at all. Frankly, I was surprised he'd lasted as long as he did. Did you see any indication of poisoning in your years of treating him? None whatsoever. His symptoms were entirely consistent with progressive heart failure. Whitfield's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to suggest that Hartley was too old to remember clearly, or that heart failure and poisoning could present similarly. But the doctor held firm, his testimony unshakable. I kept detailed records, Hartley said calmly. Every examination, every symptom, every warning I gave Thomas about his condition. Those records span 2 decades and paint a very clear picture of a man dying slowly from heart disease, not poison. Records can be falsified. By a physician with an unblemished reputation spanning 40 years? Really, sir, that's desperate even for you. The gallery erupted in laughter. Even the magistrate cracked a thin smile before banging his gavel for order. Blackwood followed with the cook from Eleanor's household, who testified about the rat poison purchase, and confirmed it had been used entirely for rodent control. Then she called the original coroner, Dr. Whitmore, who explained in exhaustive detail the examination he'd performed on Thomas's body. I found no trace of poison, no arsenic, no unusual substances, nothing that suggested anything other than cardiac arrest. If arsenic was present in quantities sufficient to kill or even sicken him, I would have detected it. Is it possible you missed something? It's possible I made an error, though I conducted a very thorough examination. But it's far more likely that the arsenic allegedly found 3 years later was introduced after burial rather than before death. By afternoon, the prosecution's case was crumbling. Blackwood hammered away at every weak point: the suspicious timing of the new evidence, Jeffrey's financial desperation, the forged codicil that had conveniently appeared just when Eleanor began rebuilding her life. Then she played her trump card. I call Mr. Edmund Price to the stand. A nervous young man approached the witness box. Eleanor didn't recognize him, but she saw Jeffrey Ashford go pale. Mr. Price, what is your profession? I'm a clerk at Drummond's Bank. And do you have knowledge of an account held by Jeffrey Ashford? I do. I processed a deposit for him 2 months ago, £10,000, paid to Dr. Bernard Morsley. The courtroom exploded. Whitfield leaped to his feet, objecting furiously, but Blackwood spoke over him. And what reason did Mr. Ashford give for this payment? He said it was for medical services. But when I asked what services justified such a large sum, he became evasive, told me to mind my own business. Did anything about this transaction strike you as unusual? Everything about it struck me as unusual. £10,000 is an enormous sum for a medical consultation, and Mr. Ashford insisted it be kept confidential, asked me not to record it in the standard ledgers. But you did record it. In a private ledger, yes. Bank policy requires all transactions be documented. Blackwood produced the ledger. I submit this as evidence, Your Honor. It shows clearly that Jeffrey Ashford paid Dr. Morsley a substantial sum just weeks before Morsley discovered arsenic in his brother's remains. The magistrate looked uncomfortable. This proves nothing conclusive. It proves a financial relationship between the man who would benefit from my client's conviction and the man whose testimony is the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. At minimum, it establishes reasonable doubt about the integrity of that testimony. Whitfield fought back, calling character witnesses who painted Eleanor as cold and calculating, but the damage was done. The jury was looking at Jeffrey Ashford with suspicion now, not Eleanor. During a recess, Sebastian pulled Eleanor aside in a small antechamber. You're winning. I can see it on the jury's faces. We're not there yet. Whitfield is desperate, which makes him dangerous. Eleanor, there's something else. Sebastian handed her a folded paper. Morrison found this among Thomas's private correspondence. It's a letter written shortly before his death. Eleanor unfolded it with shaking hands. Thomas's handwriting, familiar and painful. My physician tells me I have perhaps 6 months remaining. The heart condition I've hidden for so long is finally claiming me. I write this to make clear, if I die suddenly, it will be from natural causes, not any action of my wife's. Eleanor has been kind to me despite my many failures as a husband. She deserves better than the burden of false accusations. If anyone attempts to claim otherwise, they lie for their own purposes. Tears blurred Eleanor's vision. He knew. Even at the end, Thomas knew his family would try this. The letter is dated 3 weeks before his death and witnessed by his solicitor. It's ironclad proof of his intentions. Why didn't the solicitor come forward before? Sebastian's expression darkened. Because Jeffrey paid him to keep quiet. £10,000, same as Morsley. Morrison tracked the payment. This will destroy their entire case. That's the idea. When court reconvened, Blackwood dropped the letter like a bomb. Whitfield tried to object, tried to claim it was irrelevant, but the magistrate, perhaps sensing which way the wind was blowing, allowed it. Blackwood read it aloud, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. By the time she finished, several jury members were nodding. One was openly glaring at Jeffrey Ashford. Thomas Ashford knew he was dying, Blackwood said, her voice ringing with conviction. He knew his family would seek to blame his wife, and he took steps to protect her. This letter, written in his own hand and properly witnessed, makes his intentions clear. Lady Ashford is innocent. The only crime here is the attempted frame-up by a desperate man who needed his brother's fortune to pay his gambling debts. Whitfield's closing argument was passionate but hollow. He had no answer for the letter, no explanation for Jeffrey's payments, no way to reconcile the original coroner's findings with Morsley's suspiciously timed discovery. Blackwood's closing was surgical. She dismantled the prosecution's case piece by piece, then built her own narrative, of a woman persecuted by a greedy family, of manufactured evidence and bribed witnesses, of a society too eager to believe the worst about a woman who dared to survive her husband's death. The question before you is simple, she told the jury. Will you condemn an innocent woman based on lies? Or will you have the courage to see through this conspiracy and render a just verdict? The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Eleanor spent them in her cell, unable to eat, barely able to breathe. Sebastian stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand through the bars. Whatever happens, he said quietly, we'll face it together. If they convict me, they won't. But if they do, you have to let me go. Don't tie yourself to a convicted murderer. Sebastian's grip tightened. Never. I'd rather be tied to you in prison than free without you. A guard appeared. Jury's back. The walk back to the courtroom felt like walking to the gallows. Eleanor's legs trembled so badly she could barely climb the stairs, but she forced herself upright, forced her expression calm as she took her place beside Blackwood. The jury filed in, their faces carefully neutral. Eleanor tried to read them and found nothing. The foreman stood, a middle-aged merchant with kind eyes. In the matter of whether Eleanor Ashford committed murder by poisoning, how do you find? The courtroom held its breath. We find the defendant not guilty. Furthermore, we recommend that charges be brought against Jeffrey Ashford for perjury, bribery, and conspiracy to pervert justice. The room erupted. Eleanor's legs gave out, and only Blackwood's quick grab kept her from collapsing. Through the chaos, she found Sebastian in the crowd, saw joy and relief transform his face. The magistrate banged his gavel, trying to restore order. The defendant is acquitted of all charges and is to be released immediately. Furthermore, I order an investigation into the allegations against Jeffrey Ashford. But Eleanor barely heard the rest. Guards were removing her shackles, Blackwood was embracing her, and Sebastian was pushing through the crowd toward her. When he reached her, he swept her into his arms, propriety be damned. The gallery cheered. I told you, he whispered against her hair. I told you we'd win. Eleanor was crying now, 3 years of tension and fear finally breaking loose. We did it. We actually did it. You did it. You stood up and fought back and won. They emerged from the courthouse into late afternoon sunlight. The crowd outside had grown massive, some hostile, but many cheering. Eleanor saw women in blue ribbons, ordinary people holding signs that read Justice for Lady Ashford and Innocence Proven. Catherine pushed through the crowd, throwing her arms around Eleanor. You're free. You're actually free. Thanks to your Duke and his stubborn refusal to give up, Eleanor said, smiling at Sebastian. Our Duke, Catherine corrected. You're still getting married, aren't you? Eleanor looked at Sebastian, saw the question in his eyes. After everything they'd been through, the answer was obvious. Yes, as soon as possible. The crowd erupted again, and somewhere in the chaos, Eleanor realized something had shifted. The tide of public opinion was turning. Not completely, there would always be doubters, always be whispers. But standing here, vindicated by a jury and surrounded by supporters, she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope, and the beginning of freedom. But freedom, Eleanor discovered over the following days, came with complications she hadn't anticipated. The verdict had cleared her name legally, but society operated on different rules than courts of law, and London's elite were not accustomed to being proven wrong. The morning after her acquittal, Eleanor woke in her own bed for the first time in 2 weeks. Sunlight streamed through windows Mrs. Davies had thrown open, and the smell of fresh bread drifted up from the kitchen. For a moment, Eleanor simply lay there, savoring the luxury of safety. A knock came at her door. Mrs. Davies entered with breakfast on a tray and an enormous stack of letters. "The post has been arriving by the cartload, my lady. Seems half of London wants to congratulate you, and the other half wants to condemn you for embarrassing them." Eleanor sat up, reaching for the letters. "Let me guess which half has better handwriting." The condemning letters were predictable. Society matrons who'd believed the worst and now felt foolish. Business associates of Jeffries who resented seeing their friend exposed. Old families who viewed the entire affair as a vulgar spectacle that had lowered the tone of London society. Lady Cordelia Pemberton's letter was particularly venomous, suggesting that Eleanor had manipulated the jury through feminine wiles and the undue influence of a besotted duke. But the congratulatory letters surprised her. Women she'd never met wrote to express admiration for her courage. Young ladies like Catherine, who'd worn blue ribbons to the trial, sent notes of support. Even a few men, progressive thinkers and reformers, praised her for standing up to a corrupt system. "This one's from the Duke," Mrs. Davies said, handing over a cream envelope sealed with the Hawthorn crest. Eleanor broke it open, her heart quickening at the sight of Sebastian's bold handwriting. "My dearest Eleanor, I trust you slept well in your own bed. I certainly didn't, knowing you were so close yet properly separated by the dictates of propriety. Mother would be proud of my restraint. I am not. I'm writing to invite you to dinner tonight at Hawthorn House. My mother has, after considerable persuasion and possibly some threats on my part, agreed to meet you formally. I won't pretend it will be comfortable, but I believe it's necessary. She needs to understand that you're not going anywhere, and you deserve to face her as my future wife, not some scandal she can dismiss. If you're not ready, I understand. But Eleanor, we've faced courts and juries and the entire weight of London's judgment. Surely one disapproving duchess shouldn't be too daunting." Yours, forever and impatiently, Sebastian. Eleanor couldn't help smiling. His mother, the formidable Duchess of Hawthorn, who'd reportedly taken to her bed with vapors when news of Sebastian's involvement with the Black Widow had first broken. "Going to face the dragon in her den?" Mrs. Davies asked, reading Eleanor's expression. "Apparently, though I suspect I'm more terrifying to her than she is to me at this point." "That's the spirit, my lady. You've survived worse than one sour aristocrat." Still, Eleanor dressed with care that evening, choosing a deep emerald gown that brought out her eyes and made her look older, more dignified. She'd learned during her marriage to Thomas that appearance mattered, especially when facing people determined to find fault. The carriage Sebastian sent was ostentatious, the full Hawthorn formal coach with the family crest blazing on the doors and liveried footmen. A statement, Eleanor realized. He was claiming her publicly, making it clear she wasn't some shameful secret. Hawthorn House sat in Mayfair, a massive Georgian mansion that made Eleanor's townhouse look like a cottage. Servants lined the entrance as she arrived, their faces carefully neutral. A butler who looked old enough to have served Sebastian's grandfather led her through marble halls hung with portraits of Hawthorn ancestors, all of them staring down with the same imperious expression. Sebastian met her in the drawing room, and the relief on his face when he saw her almost made the anxiety worthwhile. "You came. You doubted? I thought you might reconsider when you remembered what my mother is like." He took her hand, studying her face. "How are you, truly? Free, terrified, exhilarated, all at once." Eleanor glanced around the opulent room. "Your house is beautiful, also intimidating. Wait until you meet the Dowager Duchess. The house will seem welcoming by comparison." As if summoned by the mention, a woman swept into the room with the presence of a queen entering her throne room. The Duchess of Hawthorne was perhaps 60, still beautiful in a severe way, dressed in gray silk that probably cost more than Eleanor's entire wardrobe. She looked Eleanor over with eyes that missed nothing. "So, you're the woman who's caused all this chaos." Eleanor curtsied with perfect formality. "Your Grace, thank you for receiving me. I didn't have much choice. My son threatened to move you into Hawthorne House as his mistress if I refused to meet you as his future wife. At least this way we maintain some pretense of propriety." "Mother," Sebastian's voice carried a warning. "Oh, hush, I'm being civil." The Duchess circled Eleanor like a general inspecting troops. "You're prettier than the papers suggested, though that's not saying much. They made you sound like Medusa herself. The papers were unkind to both of us, I think." "Indeed. I was portrayed as either a fool for not controlling my son or a monster for opposing true love. Neither characterization pleased me." She gestured toward the settee. "Sit. Let's have dinner and get this over with." Dinner was served in a formal dining room beneath a chandelier that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. The Duchess maintained a stream of pointed questions throughout the meal, clearly determined to find some fault, some reason to reject Eleanor as unsuitable. "Your family is respectable but not distinguished. Your father was a baron?" "Yes, Your Grace." "And your late husband's estate, you've retained it despite the scandal?" "The court upheld the will. I have modest income from properties in Yorkshire." "Modest? How diplomatic." The Duchess sipped her wine. "What my son sees in you I cannot fathom. He could have had any woman in England, women with impeccable pedigrees and substantial fortunes. Instead, he chooses a widow with a murdered husband and enough scandal to sink a fleet." "Mother, that's enough," Sebastian began, but Eleanor held up her hand. "No, let her speak. I'd rather know what she thinks than have her smile to my face and scheme behind my back." The Duchess's eyebrows rose. "Bold. I'll give you that. I've been accused of murder, imprisoned, tried in front of all London, and acquitted based on evidence that proved my accusers were corrupt liars. After that, I find it difficult to be intimidated by disapproval, however aristocratic its source." For a long moment, the Duchess stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. A sharp bark of sound that seemed to surprise even her. "She has spirit. I'll give you that, Sebastian. She's not some simpering miss who'll faint at the first challenge." "I tried to tell you. You told me you were in love. Love makes fools of everyone. I needed to see for myself what kind of woman could inspire such loyalty." The Duchess turned back to Eleanor. "My son has risked everything for you. His reputation, his standing, possibly his future. I need to know if you're worth it." Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "I don't know if I am, but I can tell you this. I love him enough to have refused every easy escape that would have saved me at his expense. I was offered freedom if I'd walk away from him. I chose prison instead. So whatever you think of me, know that I value him at least as much as you do." The Duchess was quiet for a long moment. Then she set down her wineglass with a decisive clink. "Very well. If you're going to marry my son and drag our family through continued scandal, I suppose I'd better help you survive it. London society will not easily forgive you for proving them wrong. You'll need allies." Eleanor blinked, surprised. "Are you offering to be one?" "I'm offering to be pragmatic. Like it or not, you're going to be the next Duchess of Hawthorne. I'd prefer that title not become a laughingstock." She stood, smoothing her skirts. "Come to tea tomorrow. I'll introduce you to the women who actually matter in this city, the ones who can make or break your reputation. If we're going to rehabilitate you, we might as well do it properly." After she swept from the room, Eleanor turned to Sebastian in disbelief. "Did your mother just offer to help me?" "I told you threats work on her. Also, she respects courage. You stood up to her, and she appreciated it." He grinned. "She's going to be a nightmare of a mother-in-law, but at least she's our nightmare now." "Speaking of which," Eleanor took his hand. "When exactly are we getting married? You keep proposing and defending me and facing down society, but we haven't actually set a date." "I was waiting for you to be ready." "I'm ready. I'm more than ready. I want to marry you before London conjures up some new scandal to throw at us." Sebastian's eyes lit up. "Next month?" "Next week." "Eleanor, I'm serious. I've spent 3 years hiding, waiting, being careful. I'm done waiting. Let's get married, face whatever comes together, and start actually living instead of just surviving. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a fervor that made her forget they were in his mother's dining room, where any servant could walk in. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. 1 week, Sebastian agreed. I'll arrange everything. The Archbishop owes me a favor. Nothing too grand. I don't want a spectacle. Too late for that. Everything we do is a spectacle. Might as well embrace it. Chot. The engagement announcement appeared in the Times 2 days later, causing exactly the uproar Eleanor had anticipated. Half of London society was scandalized. The other half was fascinated. And a small but growing segment, the reformers, the progressives, the women tired of society's double standards, celebrated. The Duchess proved as good as her word. She hosted a tea for London's most influential women, and while many declined the invitation, enough attended to make it clear that the Hawthorne family's endorsement carried weight. Lady Margaret Blackwood came, bringing with her several clients she'd successfully defended over the years. Catherine arrived with a cadre of young women who'd worn blue ribbons to Eleanor's trial. Even a few of Eleanor's old critics appeared, including, surprisingly, Margaret Pemberton, Lady Cordelia's daughter. Lady Ashford, soon to be your grace, I wanted to apologize, the young woman said quietly during the tea. My mother has been unkind, and I was too cowardly to speak against her. But watching you in that courtroom, seeing how you fought back, it changed something for me. Made me realize I don't want to be like her, cruel for the sake of maintaining power. Eleanor took her hand. Then don't be. Choose differently. That's all any of us can do. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Sebastian insisted on doing everything properly. Despite Eleanor's protest that they didn't need an elaborate ceremony, he arranged for St. George's Chapel, brought in florists who turned the church into a garden, and commissioned a wedding gown from the finest modiste in London. This is excessive, Eleanor protested when the modiste arrived with 3 assistants and enough fabric to clothe an army. This is appropriate for a duchess, Sebastian corrected. And I want everyone in London to see you walking down that aisle knowing you're beautiful, innocent, and mine. The dress, when finished, was stunning, ivory silk with delicate embroidery, elegant but not ostentatious. When Eleanor saw herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the frightened widow hiding from scandal. In her place stood someone confident, prepared to face whatever came. The night before the wedding, Catherine stayed with Eleanor at her townhouse, helping her pack the belongings she'd moved to Hawthorne House. Are you nervous? Her sister asked, folding Eleanor's chemises with careful precision. Terrified. Also happier than I've been in years. It's a strange combination. You're doing the right thing. Sebastian loves you. Anyone can see that. I know, but I also know that marrying him means accepting a life of scrutiny and judgment. People will always whisper about me. Some will always believe I killed Thomas, no matter what the jury said. Catherine set down the chemise and came to sit beside Eleanor on the bed. Do you remember what you told me when I was 12 and those girls at school were teasing me about my freckles? That anyone who judged you based on something so superficial wasn't worth knowing? Exactly. The same applies now. Anyone who judges you based on lies and scandal isn't worth your concern. You've proven yourself in the court that matters. Now live your life and let the gossips choke on their own bitterness. Eleanor laughed, hugging her sister. When did you become so wise? I learned from the best. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, April sunshine flooding London with golden light. Eleanor woke early, too nervous to sleep, and spent the morning being fussed over by Mrs. Davies and Catherine and 3 maids the Duchess had sent over to ensure everything was perfect. When she finally stood in her wedding gown, ready to leave for the church, Mrs. Davies had tears in her eyes. You look like a princess, my lady, like everything you were always meant to be. The carriage ride to St. George's Chapel took them through streets lined with people. Word had spread about the wedding, and Londoners had turned out in force to witness it. Some held signs supporting Eleanor. Others jeered and shouted accusations. But Eleanor kept her eyes forward, refusing to be shaken. Inside the chapel, hundreds of guests filled the pews. Society had shown up in force, some out of genuine support, others out of sheer curiosity. Eleanor recognized faces from her trial, from the Pemberton Gallery, from 3 years of scandal and speculation. And at the altar, Sebastian waited in full ducal regalia, looking so handsome Eleanor's breath caught. When their eyes met, everything else fell away. The crowd, the whispers, the weight of judgment. There was only him, and the future they were about to claim together. Her father walked her down the aisle, his hand steady on her arm. As they passed each row, Eleanor heard the whispers, some admiring, some shocked, all fascinated. But she kept her head high, her steps even, until she reached Sebastian. He took her hand, and she felt the slight tremor in his fingers. He was as nervous as she was. Somehow, that made her love him more. The ceremony was traditional, the archbishop's voice solemn as he led them through vows that bound them legally, socially, irrevocably. When Sebastian slipped the ring onto her finger, a gold band set with emeralds that matched her eyes, Eleanor felt tears threatening. "I love you," Sebastian whispered, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "I love you too. Forever. You may kiss your bride." Sebastian pulled her close and kissed her with a passion that made the crowd gasp and then cheer. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling, and Eleanor realized something profound. She was no longer Lady Ashford, widow under suspicion. She was the Duchess of Hawthorne, Sebastian's wife, a woman who'd fought for her life and won. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, while the congregation erupted in applause. Outside, the crowd had grown massive, thousands of people filling the square, cheering and throwing flowers. "They love you," Sebastian said, amazed. "They love a good story, and we've given them one." The reception at Hawthorne House was elaborate but warm. The Duchess had outdone herself, transforming the ballroom into something magical. Toasts were made, some genuine, some clearly forced by social obligation. But Eleanor didn't care. She danced with Sebastian, laughed with Catherine, and even managed a cordial conversation with several of the society matrons who'd condemned her months ago. Late in the evening, as the party continued around them, Sebastian pulled Eleanor aside into a quiet alcove. "Happy?" "Deliriously. Also exhausted. How long do we have to stay at our own wedding? We're the Duke and Duchess. We can leave whenever we want." "Then let's leave. I want to start our actual life, not just the performance of it." They slipped away quietly, taking a smaller carriage to a townhouse Sebastian had prepared as their private residence, away from Hawthorne House and its formality, a place where they could be themselves. Inside, a fire crackled in the bedroom hearth. Champagne waited on ice, and for the first time in 3 years, Eleanor felt completely, utterly safe. Sebastian helped her out of the elaborate wedding gown with careful reverence. "I've been dreaming of this moment since I saw you at the gallery." "Just this moment? Not the wedding or the vindication or anything else?" "Those were necessary. But this, having you here, alone, mine, this is what I actually wanted." He kissed her shoulder, her neck, the corner of her mouth. "You're the Duchess of Hawthorne now. Society will have to accept it. Some never will. Their loss." Sebastian pulled her close. "Eleanor, I want you to know something. Everything we've been through, the scandal, the trial, all of it, I'd do it again in a heartbeat if it meant ending up here with you." "Even knowing the cost?" "Especially knowing the cost, because it proved what we're capable of together. We faced the entire weight of London society and won." "What could possibly challenge us after that?" Eleanor laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "You're underestimating society's capacity for scandal. Give them 6 months, and they'll have invented some new drama for us. Then we'll face that too, together." They made love slowly, savoring every touch, every whispered word, and later, lying tangled together in sheets that smelled of lavender and possibility, Eleanor felt something she'd thought lost forever: peace. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the study of Hawthorne House, reviewing plans for the girls' school she was establishing in East London. The project had started small, an idea she'd mentioned to Sebastian about educating young women in science and mathematics, and had grown into something substantial. The Duchess had contributed funding, Several progressive ladies had joined as patrons, and applications from prospective students were flooding in. "You're changing the world," Sebastian said, coming up behind her to wrap his arms around her waist. "One educated girl at a time. I'm giving them options, that's all. The chance to be more than just wives and mothers if they choose. My radical Duchess," he kissed her temple. "Have I mentioned I love you lately?" "Not in the past hour. I was beginning to worry." A knock came at the door. Morrison entered, looking pleased with himself. Your Graces, I thought you'd want to know. Jeffrey Ashford was sentenced this morning. 10 years for fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. His family has been forced to sell off most of their estates to cover his debts and legal fees." Eleanor felt a grim satisfaction. Justice, finally. Not just for her, but for everyone Jeffrey had tried to destroy. "And the Pemberton family?" Sebastian asked. Richard Pemberton quietly retired from public life after his role in the blackmail attempt came to light. His wife Cordelia is still attempting to salvage her reputation, but most of society has moved on. There are fresher scandals to obsess over. After Morrison left, Eleanor stood at the window, looking out over London. Somewhere in this city, young women were being told they couldn't pursue education or meaningful work. Somewhere, widows were being persecuted for daring to survive their husbands. Somewhere, the system that had nearly destroyed her was still grinding away at others. But she'd survived. More than survived. She'd won. And now she had the resources and platform to fight for others. "What are you thinking?" Sebastian asked. "That we're not done. The school is just the beginning. I want to establish a legal fund for women accused unjustly, support for widows facing estate challenges, reform of the laws that allow families to contest wills without evidence." Sebastian smiled. "My radical, world-changing Duchess. What did I do to deserve you? You chose me when everyone else chose the scandal. You fought for me when fighting meant risking everything. You saw me as a person, not a reputation. That was easy. You're remarkable. We're remarkable. Together." A year after the wedding, Eleanor published a book, a memoir of her experiences combined with a call for legal reform. Critics called it scandalous, inappropriate, too radical. But it became a bestseller, inspiring other women to come forward with their own stories of injustice. The Hawthorne School for Young Women opened with 40 students and a revolutionary curriculum that included science, mathematics, philosophy, and rhetoric. Within 5 years, it would expand to 3 locations and become the model for similar institutions across England. And Eleanor herself became something unexpected, not just a duchess, but a voice for reform. She spoke at gatherings, wrote articles, supported legislation that expanded women's rights. Some called her dangerous, others called her necessary. Sebastian supported her through all of it, using his wealth and influence to amplify her message. Together, they became the couple society loved to criticize and couldn't help but respect. On their 5th anniversary, Sebastian took Eleanor back to the Pemberton Gallery where they'd first reunited. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" he asked as they stood before the same Venetian landscape where they'd had their first conversation. "I said being with you would destroy us both." "You were wrong." "I was. Being with you saved us both." Eleanor took his hand. "I thought I was choosing love over safety. Turns out I was choosing life over survival." Poetic. Did you write that for your next book? Probably. Everything becomes material eventually. They stood together in the gallery, surrounded by art and memories. 2 people who'd defied every expectation and rewritten their own story. Outside, London continued its endless dance of scandal and judgment. But inside, in the space they'd carved out together, there was only love. And sometimes, Eleanor reflected, that was enough to change the world. The woman who'd returned to society 3 years ago, desperate, accused, alone, no longer existed. In her place stood the Duchess of Hawthorne, educator, reformer, survivor. A woman who'd faced the worst London could throw at her and emerged stronger. She'd been called a murderer, a fortune hunter, a scandal. Now she was called revolutionary, brilliant, dangerous. And on quiet nights when Sebastian held her close and whispered words meant only for her ears, she was called beloved. That, Eleanor decided, was the only title that truly mattered. Years later, when their daughter, named Catherine after Eleanor's sister, asked about how her parents met, Eleanor would tell her the truth about scandal and courage, about a society that valued reputation over justice, about fighting back when the world told you to surrender. Did you ever regret it? Catherine would ask. Fighting so hard for something that could have failed? And Eleanor would smile, taking her daughter's hand. Never. Because the only real failure would have been not trying at all. Your father taught me that. Love is worth fighting for, truth is worth defending, and sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to accept the world as it is and work to make it better. That sounds like one of your speeches. Everything sounds like one of my speeches eventually. Your father finds it charming, usually. But standing in the gallery on their anniversary, with Sebastian's hand warm in hers and their future spreading out before them like an unexplored country, Eleanor wasn't thinking about speeches or schools or reform. She was thinking about a boy who'd become a duke and a girl who'd become a woman, and the love that had survived duty, scandal, and the brutal judgment of an entire city. She was thinking about second chances and how rarely they came and how fiercely you had to fight to keep them. She was thinking that sometimes, against all odds, love didn't just survive the world that tried to kill it. Sometimes, it conquered that world entirely and remade it into something better.